All right, we'd like to keep on track. Today we have Keaton Smith, who helped with the financing of the home that I showed last session, and Peter Nierengarten, who works for the city and is going to tell us about the Energy Action Plan, and Keaton's going to talk about legislation. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Terry. So we're here today to talk about how we're going to solve the climate challenge. First, I just want to thank all of you for being here. It's turning into quite the beautiful afternoon out there, and you guys have a lot of choices of where you could be. So I just want to acknowledge your presence here as an action that moves the conversation forward, and just thank you all for being here. Just a little bit about me. So I'm a commercial banker. I recently joined the Fayetteville School Board. I've been on for 10 or 11 months. I help lead a nonprofit housing developer in town, and I'm a dad to a 2-year-old named Cora. I've been volunteering with Citizens Climate Lobby for the last 7 years, and I'm speaking today with my Citizens Climate Lobby hat on, and my opinions are my own and not any of the other organizations that I'm affiliated with. So I skipped all of the science. We're getting plenty of that, but wanted to cut straight to the sense of urgency. IPCC, 50% reduction by 2030. I think that's now 11 years. We need a solution that matches the scale of the problem. And we need it to work quickly. So what makes a good climate solution? Number one, it has to match the scale of the problem. It has to drive fairly radical economic change quickly. We need strong incentives for people and for businesses, and we need certainty for businesses so that they can invest and innovate. We need a fair policy, something that ensures a just transition, something that centers the environmental justice movement, and something that's progressive, that doesn't leave our low and moderate income friends behind. We need something that's sticky. What we mean by sticky is durable. So the Clean Power Plan was passed by executive order. It was then challenged in court, went to the Supreme Court stuck it down. We need something that is durable, that once it passes Congress, it's going to be there. It's not going to be a political football. And we need something that's good for the economy and creates a lot of jobs. So, our solution is, let me see if there's a little bit more. Okay. So our solution that we've been laser focused on for the last 9 or 10 years is called carbon fee and dividend. So we'll start with the carbon fee. We assess a price on carbon emitting fuel sources at the point of entry into the economy. So if this is foreign produced fuel, that's at the port of entry, where it's being brought into the country. If it's domestically produced fuel, then it's at the mine or the wellhead. Now, it's important to assess the fee at the point of entry into the economy, because then the price gets passed from business to business to business to business throughout the supply chain and results in slightly higher prices for carbon-intensive goods. So it's an economy-wide. This is a systemic approach. It's important to do that, because if we just did a gas tax, that would only be part of it. But by an economy-wide approach means that carbon-intensive goods like cement and steel and plastic, those will also go up in price. We're truly pricing the externality. So we collect a fee, and that sends a strong incentive and a strong price signal, and adds a lot of certainty to businesses. This makes some things go up in price. Here's the cool thing. We collect all of that revenue, and then aside from administrative fees, we rebate everything to American citizens. So you literally get a monthly check or direct deposit in your bank account that reminds you that your purchasing decisions are saving the planet. I think this would be hugely popular. People love their income tax refunds. Alaskans love their royalty checks. You would literally be getting cash in your pocket. And the dividend is really, really critical because everyone in this room would get the same dividend check, but not all of us have the same carbon footprint. And wealthier folks tend to have a larger carbon footprint. They buy more stuff. They travel more. They live in larger houses. And so they pay more fee, but they get the same dividend. Lower income folks spend less on energy. They travel less. They buy less stuff. They pay less fee. So how it works out is about 60%, the bottom 60% of the income spectrum comes out even or ahead. So when you look at, okay, I'm going to pay this much in fee and I'm going to get this much in dividend, the bottom 60% comes out even or ahead. Long story short, we're putting money in the pockets of people that need more money in their pockets, increasing people's disposable income, which is another stimulus for the economy. So we talked about carbon fee, we talked about the carbon dividend. Two other components, a border carbon adjustment. So many people, when they hear about that, hear about a carbon tax, they'll say, well, what about China? What about India? Border carbon adjustment is critical. So if a product is manufactured overseas, let's say China, and let's say China has a lower price on carbon than the US does, when that product enters the US economy, there is a adjustment made, sort of like a tariff, that would increase the, that would account for the fact that it was manufactured in a place with a lower price on carbon. This does two big things. One, it incentivizes US manufacturers to stay in the US. It does not incentivize US manufacturers to move operations overseas to countries with less regulations. And second, it incentivizes foreign governments to create a similar price on carbon, which is really critical. And then finally, so limited regulatory adjustment. We talked about the Clean Power Plan, and what we'd essentially be saying is that, okay, we pass this legislation, we agree not to regulate CO2 emissions for the next 10 years. The Clean Power Plan would have set some mandates, would have regulated CO2 emissions. And we're agreeing to have a moratorium on CO2 regulations for the next 10 years. Now, for this audience, you might be a little bit suspect of that, but here's why I think it's okay. One, in 10 years, if we're not meeting the carbon reduction goals that science tells us we need, then regulations are fair game again. Second, it's only about CO2 regulations. It's not about NOx and SOx and mercury and the air quality stuff. Those can still be regulated. So it's really just about CO2 regulations, which aren't currently regulated in the U.S. There is a precautionary tale here. There's some on the group. Some people, there's a group called the Climate Leadership Council that is a group of Republican statesmen and a lot of businesses who are pushing for a very similar policy. There's a part of their policy to be aware of, and that would be a waiver of tort liability for fossil fuel companies. And Citizens Climate Lobby has said this is a non-starter for Citizens Climate Lobby. So there are lawsuits happening right now where fossil fuel companies are being sued by children, by state attorneys general, for knowingly not acting to protect humanity from their product. So something to be careful about and something to watch. So how many people, be honest, before you walked into this room, how many people were aware that there was a serious bipartisan piece of climate legislation introduced in Congress right now? About half of us. So in November, we helped introduce the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. This is the first Republican-sponsored comprehensive climate legislation that has been introduced in over 10 years. That had 3 Republican co-sponsors in November in the previous Congress. It's now been reintroduced in this Congress with 1 Republican co-sponsor. We're up to 32 co-sponsors in total. We're very excited to add additional Republican co-sponsors, and that's something that we in Arkansas have the opportunity to help with. We have Republican lawmakers who could be co-sponsors of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. Our Republican co-sponsor is Francis Rooney from Florida. I like Francis Rooney because, for multiple reasons, but one of them is because he is in a safe district. He is not a moderate Republican. He is in a safe district in Florida, and he's hearing about the impacts of climate change. He's not going anywhere. He's got strong conservative credentials, and he was an original co-sponsor on the legislation and is working to bring additional Republican colleagues on board. So, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, in summary, it's effective. It will produce the carbon reductions we know that we need at the scale and the pace that we need them. It's good for people. Lower income folks come out ahead. It's good for the economy, good for public health. Good for the economy, creates a lot of jobs. It's bipartisan, and it's revenue neutral. We've got a few folks up here that have issued statements of support for the legislation. James Hansen, Don Cheadle. George Shultz is a Republican statesman. I looked up his Wikipedia today. He was Secretary of Labor, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of State, and Director of the Office of Management and Budget. He is the Republican statesman of Republican statesmen, and he was also on the board of Theranos and caught some flack for that if you followed the Theranos story. But so he is supportive. Catherine Hayhoe, Michelle mentioned. If you guys don't follow Catherine Hayhoe, she is the best climate communicator out there. She's incredible. She's also going to be one of the keynotes at the CCL conference coming up in June in DC. All right, so Citizens Climate Lobby, I'll share a little bit about the organization. They have tons of resources online. We've got a special resource devoted to the bill, energyinnovationact.org. Can you see that all right? And then if you're new to it, want to get involved, there's like a weekly newcomer phone call. We've been in existence for 10 or 11 years. We're up to 425 groups across the country, more than 100,000 supporters. This is grassroots organizing at its finest. I'm trying to remember, I should have looked up what the annual budget of the organization is. I mean, it's like $5 million annual budget. They've got 10 employees. This is volunteer-driven, grassroots-driven by local chapters. But it's very, very organized. And so we work in several different really specific ways. So grassroots outreach. In 2018, over 3,000 different events. This looks like tabling at a farmer's market, hosting a movie screening, having our monthly meetings. We meet on the second Wednesday every month from 7 to 8:30 at the Omni Center. We'd love for you to join us. We have an endorsement program. So anyone can get online and sign up as an official endorser of the bill. And then we also approach elected officials, community leaders, faith leaders, business leaders about registering their own endorsement. And so, and with endorsements, it's all about existing relationships. So that's a way that that a lot of different people can plug in a really time-efficient way. If you have a relationship with a faith leader, with a business leader, and you think they might be able to get on board, CCL has tons of materials and resources to help you make your case. We've got a really strong our local chapter. Shelley is here, who's been was a founder of our local chapter, and she's been the backbone of our Letters to the Editor program for years. We probably have a letter to the editor or op-ed published in the local paper every single week, often more than one a week. I know I get a lot of emails about them. They come. I bet we have more than 50 in a year. Shelley probably knows exactly how many. But so we've got a team that writes letters to the editor, writes op-eds, and meets with newspaper editorial boards. So media outreach is very important. And then arguably the most important of all is direct advocacy, meeting with our members of Congress. Part of CCL's strategy is that each member of Congress has a liaison who manages communication with the staff member. I serve in that capacity with Congressman Womack's office. We have multiple meetings a year with their local in-district offices, and then twice a year we take a big group to Washington, D.C. to meet with their D.C. offices. We meet with all 6 offices, the 4 congressmen and 2 senators. We've done it for the last 4 or 5 years, 6 years. So this will be our 7th year. And CCL National had 1,400 meetings with members of Congress during 2018. The event that we're having here tonight is our annual fundraiser that allows us to fund scholarships that allow people to attend the conference and lobby day in DC, which has ensured that we have a lot of different voices at the table when we take groups to DC. I think last year we took 37 Arkansans to DC. There's a 3-day thing in June. This year it's the 9th, 10th, and 11th. Lobby on Tuesday the 11th. And then there's another November fly-in date. So we bring groups twice a year to DC. We're now up to 7 chapters in Arkansas, which is really exciting. And really our Fayetteville group has spearheaded that. We've been around the longest. We've been able to raise money to hire a couple of part-time employees that travel the state. They support local chapters. They build capacity at the local level, and they help us with fundraising. So anyway, that's what the event is about tonight, if you guys can stick around for dinner. So what can we do to take action? 2 years ago, I decided to start talking about climate change more. I'd always been very hesitant to do it, mostly for work reasons. You know, I'm a commercial banker, and I'm sure not all my clients agree with me. And
But some do.
But some do. You know, we always say that climate should not be a partisan issue. And so two years ago, I made the decision to start acting like it and start normalizing talking about climate change. And I think that's something that we can all do in every conversation that we're in, is extracting partisanship, extracting contempt from our communication about contentious issues, you know, both in person and online. Do contentious issues get discussed online? And then we would love for anyone who's interested to plug into their local chapter, join us at a local monthly meeting, join us in DC, multiple different ways to plug in based on kind of, you know, what your passion is, what your skill set is, what you are called to do. So I'll leave us with a quote from our founder, Marshall Saunders. "I used to think that the important people were taking care of the important problems. No, preserving a livable world is up to us little people. What we do and do not do really counts." That's all I have. Happy to answer any real quick clarifications or questions. I know Peter's going to talk about what the city of Fayetteville is doing at a local level.
the pillars of the region, the Walmarts, the Tysons, etc., expressed any particular opinion about carbon fee? Are they on record? Are they waiting out to see what Alice says?
They've not weighed in officially. Walmart did engage in state-level energy policy this year for the first time, which is a really positive step forward.
Wasn't Bud Walton part of that climate leadership group?
The Climate Leadership Council that I mentioned, which has a very similar carbon fee and dividend sort of proposal. One of their board members and likely one of their largest funders is Rob Walton, who is on the board, I believe, still of Walmart. And he's kind of the reason that the Walton Family Foundation does a lot of environmental stuff. He's been interested in conservation for a long time. So I would say that there's that, avenue and path. There is also a lot of food and consumer packaged goods companies are starting to ask for a price on carbon. Unilever and several other companies came out with a statement in the last couple weeks in support. And so, at the end of the day, Walmart's the dog that wags the Unilever tail, not the other way around. But they're in their orbit, so there's reasons to think we're making progress.
I was curious because I know of all companies, Exxon's CEO, Royal Dutch Shell, one of them, years ago, came out in an interview with either carbon tax or carbon dividend.
Yep.
I don't know if that was just naked interest of trying to start coal out of the market and then oil get filled in.
Yeah, the oil majors with big natural gas reserves, they stand to benefit in the short term. And then they're very interested in the tort liability reduction, which is a part of the Climate Leadership Council's proposal. But yeah, Exxon is a part of the Climate Leadership Council. And clearly Walmart's doing incredible things with their supply chain sustainability. I think one new opportunity is better quantifying and communicating what additional money in the pocket, additional disposable income for the Walmart shopper would mean to their bottom line. So there's reason to think they should like this policy. Orlo?
I comment that in this bill that just passed, Congress 145, that Walmart was one of the main actors and participators in the legislation.
Yes.
And that they want to, their new headquarters in the middle of Fayetteville, they want to make it net zero for the whole building.
Yeah, Orlo is referencing a piece of state legislation that Walmart engaged in with an organization that Peter and I are on the board of, Arkansas Advanced Energy Association, to provide solar leasing in Arkansas. Was there one more question?
Well, here, let's cut off questions for now and
Do
give
questions
Peter a
later.
chance and hold your questions until
Sounds
after
good.
Peter's done, please.
Sounds good. All I do is do some witty banter.
Witty banter. Oh, that's my specialty for sure. How about just the introduction? So Keaton did a fantastic job talking about what's going on at the national level around carbon policy, and I was asked to bring the local perspective on that same conversation. So I'm the sustainability director at the city of Fayetteville, and energy policy and carbon policy is obviously one of the areas that we work in, along with a lot of other areas. And I'll share a little bit with you all about what we've done broadly, but I'm going to focus on our energy action plan, which is a fairly recent addition to the master planning efforts that the city has done. This plan was adopted by our city council on January 2nd of last year, so it's about 16, 17 months old now. The history behind an energy action plan for the city of Fayetteville, if you all will remember, November of 2016 and political elections that happened in November 2016 when the dust settled after all of that. Mayor Jordan and I were discussing, well, what in the heck are we going to do now? It seems like the trajectory could be changing at the federal level, and we need to take some action at the local level to continue to move things forward. And so that was the impetus behind the plan, and took us about a year or so to work through a whole stakeholder process and get the plan adopted by council. So in terms of areas of influence and work, and what the overarching goals of the plan are, so it aligns with the Kyoto Protocol of 1997 and the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement in terms of trying to reach a 80% carbon emission goal by the year 2050. The 4 goal areas are in our major scope in terms of transportation sector, energy supply, so electricity coming to the city of Fayetteville, our buildings and energy consumed in our buildings, and then emissions related to waste. And as I work through the presentation, you'll see as we developed goals for the plan, we actually added a 5th area, which is a cross-sector area that spans across those 4 areas. In terms of actually calculating carbon emissions, the big 5, as we call them, are the emissions sectors. And there are electricity sector, so carbon emissions from electricity production, carbon emissions from vehicles that are in our city, emissions from natural gas consumption, landfill emissions, and then the tiny one on the end is from wastewater treatment. And this aligns with a protocol that an organization by the name of ICLEI has developed for local governments to assess and account for their carbon emissions. And so we followed their protocol. One of the first things we did is, in doing this effort, is set our baseline and try to understand where our carbon emissions were coming from. So you can see this is an 8-year history in those 5 sectors: electricity, vehicles, VMT stands for vehicle miles traveled, that's what that acronym is, gas usage, landfill waste, and wastewater. You can see electricity and vehicles are big components of our overall carbon emissions. One of the interesting things to note is when you run the numbers on a per capita basis, so the population of the city is growing, carbon emissions, have kind of trended downward a little bit, up and down, but downward, particularly in recent years. But per capita emissions have really begun to drop, and so I'd like to talk about the fact that we're at least getting a little bit more efficient in terms of our carbon emissions as our city grows and potentially densifies, and public transit and biking and all those things become more commonplace. So high-level goals that we set and our council adopted as part of the plan. 80% greenhouse gas emission reduction, that's the overarching goal, and then we set some goals around energy consumption, and so transitioning to clean energy for the community by but transitioning to 100% clean energy essentially by the year 2050. So that means all the electricity consumed in the city, the goal is to have that from clean sources by 2050. We also set some goals that were specific to local government operations. We felt like we had a little bit more control over what we can do as a city government, as an organization, and set an even more challenging goal for ourselves of 100% clean energy for city government operations just 11 years from now in 2030. And towards the end of the presentation, I'll show you how we're doing with that number. We are currently at 16% clean energy in terms of the supply of electricity that the city government utilizes. And more broadly in the city of Fayetteville, the number is pretty close to that also. We also set goals under all the 5 major areas. You can see all of those. Under the cross-sector area, the 3rd bullet down is building support for the carbon fee and dividend strategy that Keaton mentioned. And then we've got goals around energy, reducing energy consumption, again, the energy supply goals, reducing our vehicle miles traveled and our emissions related to vehicles, and then increasing what we call our mode share, so the percentage of people who are biking and walking and taking transit for their regular transportation needs. That goal is 25%. Right now we're at about half that number. So we've got some work to do there. And then in the waste sector, we want to achieve a 40% diversion goal from our landfill by 2027. Right now we're at 19% on that number. So the way the plan is laid out, we have that 80% goal at the very top, and then our sector level goals that I just shared with you in the cross-sector buildings, energy supply, transportation, and waste sector. And then under that, we have several strategies that help sort of target and implement those goals, and then action items that are even very below those strategies that are discrete items that are placed on a long schedule of basically a to-do list for us in terms of implementing the plan. Here's what that example of the strategies looks like from our transportation sector. So again, trying to reduce vehicle miles traveled and increasing the mode share of biking, walking, and transit. So 3 different strategies that the city is pursuing community-wide to implement those efforts. And then in terms of action items, this is what the actions look like. So under the strategies from our energy, what is this? This is our strategy around increasing local renewable installations. So several actions, including stakeholders, timelines for each of those actions. So again, this is essentially our to-do list, and we have all these mapped out on a large spreadsheet and tracking on how we're doing on all of them. And I'll share with you a little bit about how we're doing on a couple of these as I get towards the end of the presentation. So again, I mentioned the goal is 80% carbon emission reduction. Is the light working? Okay, no, it doesn't work on the screen. But anyway, this is what 80% would look like by the year 2050, this little bar here. This is what carbon emissions would look like if, with status quo, if we just kept going as we are. And so here's where we were in 2010. So if implemented, our carbon emission numbers look significantly smaller than they do today. As with any master planning project that the city does, robust stakeholder involvement is always important, and community input. So we did a lot of work around engaging the community on different questions about various components of the plan, urban forests and tree canopy, support for clean energy and our clean energy goals, building codes, which is one of the strategies in there, and just carbon emission, greenhouse gas emission reduction in general. And as you can see, we saw strong support on all of our questions and good stakeholder feedback on all of the items. So plans are great, and this plan is essentially our roadmap for the next 10 to 15 years on these items. But what I'm really even more excited about than the plan is what we've been able to accomplish so far in terms of implementation of the plan. So again, I mentioned we're about 16, 17 months into this. So one of the areas that around the advocacy component is just the dialogue and the conversation the city has been trying to have all the way from the top, particularly from Mayor Jordan on advocating around clean energy, around carbon emissions. So Mayor Jordan was the 9th mayor to sign on to a letter to the Trump administration when they announced the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement. That letter promised to uphold and honor and implement the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. Right now there's 407 signatures on that mayor letter. That mayoral letter. We've also got a ton of information on our website around climate change and specifically what climate change is doing and means in Arkansas. So we try to bring it down to the local level. Several different resources on what that looks like, including a couple of maps on just changes in cold hardiness zones across the state. So the northward moving of those lines that of coldness in the wintertime that we have. We've also done a lot of work in the waste diversion sector. So just Monday of this week, we implemented brand new rates for our recycling and trash collections division, which I oversee at the city. And those new rates allow us to implement several policies and programs around waste diversion that we're really excited about, and we're part of a master plan focused on waste diversion from 2007. We're expanding our commercial recycling access in the city of Fayetteville. So for a long time, folks that live in multifamily complexes have had limited access to recycling. And they got charged extra for recycling, which doesn't happen in the single-family sector. So we've eliminated the additional fee for multifamily recycling. We're adding 2 new routes of curbside service to small multifamily, and then we're adding what we call our battleship stations for larger multifamily complexes, which are the divided roll-off containers that have places for your paper and your cardboard and your aluminum to go in each one. We're also deeply discounting commercial recycling while raising the rates on commercial trash collection to try and send a nice, healthy price signal to the commercial businesses in the city around waste diversion. We have been running a commercial food waste pilot for quite some time, and we're transitioning that now to a full-fledged commercial food waste collection program. So we'll be going to local businesses, particularly grocery stores and restaurants and folks that are generating food waste, which is about 20% of the total waste stream that goes to our landfill, and collecting that and bringing it to our facility and mixing it in with the yard debris that we already collect from residents in the city, and creating a nice, healthy compost material that then we can sell back to citizens. And then construction and demolition waste is an area where we're working with a local company to try and execute a pilot project around construction and demolition waste and recycling that we're hoping to get off the ground this fall, and more to come on that as we continue to move forward. Energy efficiency retrofits, we've been doing this for a while at our city buildings. Up here is just an example of a couple of buildings where we took out 400 watt metal halide high bay lighting and replaced it with 100 watt LEDs. So we cut the electricity consumption by 3/4. Important takeaway from this slide is that the paybacks on these projects are really, really short and good, and that we're significantly reducing the electricity consumption at the buildings. Also, we're improving the lighting quality at the gym and at our recycling collections transfer station. One of the projects that I'm most excited about, we inked a deal in November with our utility company and a solar developer for a 10 megawatt solar array project that's split between our 2 wastewater treatment plants. So it's actually 5 megawatts at each of the 2 wastewater treatment plants, with an additional 12 megawatt hours at each wastewater treatment plant of battery storage. So there was a discussion in the last presentation about batteries more at a residential and a commercial scale, and it was mentioned that there is no difference in pricing time of day that you pay on your electric bill, but the utility company, who does have to go out on the open market and buy electricity both when it's expensive and when it's cheap, if they have a storage solution that allows them to bank cheap electricity and then deploy it when electricity is more expensive, then the economics really begin to make sense on that project. So the agreement we signed for this project is a 20-year agreement, and the city is it's 87 acres total of ground-mounted solar panels. Here's a picture of what half of that looks like from yesterday out at our east side wastewater treatment plant. So this is about 40-ish acres of ground-mounted solar just across the White River from our Noland wastewater treatment plant. The economics on the deal are pretty outstanding as well. It cost the city $560,000 to put this $23 million solar facility on our property, which we are leasing to the solar developer. That $560,000 will return us $182,000 a year in savings, so it is a little bit over a 3-year return on our investment, which is hard for elected officials to say no to when you can present them with an economic argument like that. And in the 20-year life of the project, we'll have a $6 million worth of saving. And so I mentioned our 16% clean energy number and our goal of wanting to move to 100% clean energy. This project alone takes us from 16% to 72% clean energy. So it's a huge, we're moving the needle big time with this single project. And one of the reasons we're able to do that is these 2 solar arrays were sized to match the electricity consumption at the 2 wastewater treatment plants. Those facilities are the city's largest electricity consuming facilities that we have. So we're able to take a big bite out of that electricity consumption. Here we go. Okay, so a couple other implementation items. Of course, for a long time the city has been green, and not green in the sustainable sense, but green in just a city of lots of trees. And so continued efforts around tree planting and through our urban forestry department. In fact, my office right now is working on a potential grant with Beaver Watershed Alliance on an urban tree planting program that we'd like to focus in low-income areas of the community, so we can get heat island mitigation, stormwater sequestration, electricity reduction, and carbon sequestration all in one. Our bike share program, we launched that in September, so that was an initiative that directly focuses on upping that bike, walk, transit mode share. Our mobility plan is a huge focus on active transportation, biking, walking, and transit. The voters of Fayetteville recently passed a $72 million bond question on transportation focused infrastructure improvements, and this mobility plan will be what guides that spending over the next 15 years. And then city plan is our master plan around land use in the city of Fayetteville. Has very strong nexus with our mobility plan, but guides infill and prioritizations around densification and preventing urban sprawl, preserving our enduring green network, doing all the things that we want to do in terms of making our city more livable and more friendly for people. And so I guess finally what I'd like to just share is the specifics on what our latest, which is 2017, greenhouse gas emission numbers look like as compared to our original 2010 baseline. We're working on our 2018 numbers right now, but don't have those ready to share just yet. So for vehicle emissions, we actually went up in vehicle emissions in 2017 by a little bit. Our per capita emissions were down ever so slightly, but total emissions were up. Our landfill emissions also were up a little bit, and those two I think are predominantly driven by growth of the city and just more people, more emissions in both of those sectors. And let's see, our wastewater treatment also relative to growth up ever so slightly. But the good news is emissions in the electricity sector were down significantly, and this is before we've even accounted for the solar facility out at our wastewater treatment plant. So most of this comes from the grid becoming cleaner. I mentioned we're only at 16%. That's an improvement over where we were previously, and enough of an improvement for us to achieve 22% reduction in terms of emissions from our electricity sector. And then we also benefited, I think, from a little bit of warmer winter in 2017. And so that reduced our natural gas emissions as well. We're crossing our fingers and hopeful that 2018 numbers are also positive, and I'll have reporting on that probably by the end of next month to share with our city council. Oh, and then I guess the good news is 8% total emissions from our baseline, which is, we're headed in the right direction, but we know we've got more work to do for sure.
Even before your project?
Even before our project, that's right. Yep. So this is a snapshot of what's happening at the local level. That's my final slide as I get the 5-minute call. What questions or conversations do you guys want to have about what's happening at the local level or the national level? Yes, Joanna.
What would you say contributed most to the drop in the grid, the 18% reduction?
So
the solar
yeah.
project isn't even included in it.
Predominantly it is it's wind farms in the Midwest, and just the the massive investments that have been all, we're part of what's called the Southwest Power Pool in terms of where our electricity comes from, and the Southwest Power Pool essentially stretches from Texas all the way to North Dakota. And so we benefit from a lot of those wind farms that you see west of here when you drive to Colorado or wherever. And there's been, those are continuing to be built and added to that pool of electricity supply and that Southwest Power Pool. And that's where the majority of it comes from.
You had mentioned on one of your slides something about a higher transfer tip, or I didn't get it all down.
Higher.
And it had the word tip in it, and I just need to.
Tipping rate?
Oh, at the transfer station. So part of our new rates that went into effect on Monday, Earth Day, were discounts on recycling, but also raising the tip fee. So that's the price. That's an industry term. I shouldn't use that, I guess. But that's the price that trucks pay to come into our transfer station and tip or dump trash per ton. So that fee used to be $46 a ton, and it is now $52 a ton if you're a Fayetteville business or resident, and it is $60 a ton if you are bringing us waste from outside the city.
Okay.
So again, a pricing signal to try and encourage diversion. Yep.
Could you briefly describe the construction and demo waste pilot program?
Briefly, there's still details to be worked out on it, but we're working with a company by the name of White Line that does roll-off hauling already in Northwest Arkansas. They are in the process of constructing basically a sorting facility in Bethel Heights next to Hutchins concrete crushing. And so what our plan is to take, starting out 4 basically roll-off containers per day from construction projects in Fayetteville. Instead of bringing them to our transfer station and tipping them onto our floor and sending them to the landfill, is send them to this facility in Bethel Heights where the wood will be separated, the cardboard, the metals, the masonry.
And what type of projects? Like, are you targeting a specific market?
What we're going to target are customers that we already serve with our roll-off program, which is predominantly new construction, new residential construction, new commercial construction, some demolitions as well. What we probably will not send them are clean outs of loads that we think just have predominantly trash. We want to try and focus on loads where we feel like there's a healthy percentage of material that can be actually sorted out of the waste stream. And we see it every single day. I mean, these roll-off containers tip on our transfer station, and there's mountains of usable material in it. The challenge is just sorting that usable material out of that waste stream. It doesn't happen very well on construction projects, and I know that's been tried in a lot of construction projects with some degrees of success, but having a facility that can take it mixed and separate it into the usable components is what we're working on.
And I guess that Mike Johnson knows about.
I don't know if Mike does,
Okay.
but we should visit with him about
Okay.
it. Yeah.
With that, we need to, I'm sure that both Keaton and Peter will be available up front, but we need to set up for the next speaker in this room, so thank you.